May I start with Mr. Van Baal? Mr. Van Baal, maybe you have a short statement that you would like to make about your resolution. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning to you all. Mr. Chairman, directors, fellow shareholders, and of course a warm welcome to center stage, Wael Saman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Let me start by saying science is very clear. To limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C, as agreed by 194 countries in Paris in 2015, the world must almost halve emissions by 2030. That's what science tells us. Our company, one of the largest emitters in the world, according to its own carbon disclosure product reporting, has no targets that will lead to substantial absolute emissions reductions by 2030. No targets that lead to that, what we need to achieve Paris. So our board, dear fellow shareholders, is determined to cling to fossil fuels, to their carbon-based business model as long as possible, with the excuse that the profits in renewables are not as handsome. Your board ignores that the excessive profits in turning hydrocarbons into petrodollars will be over soon as fossil fuel companies will pay for climate damage. Your board refuses to use the current windfall profits to explore new business models at scale. As AGM, one of the Climate Action 100+ lead investors, points out, there's no independent third-party source that shows that Shell is Paris-aligned by 2030. And let's face it, if Shell had Paris-aligned targets for 2030, the board would not urge their shareholders to vote against Shareholder Resolution 26. Shareholder Resolution 26, let me remind everybody of that, requests no more and no less than a Paris-aligned Scope 3 targets for 2030. So therefore, I will not waste any more time, I will not waste anyone's time today in trying to convince the board. Instead, I will address our fellow shareholders. Dear shareholders, let me try to address the shareholders in a better way then. Dear shareholders, your board is only determined to cling to hydrocarbons because you, shareholders, allow them to do so, because you, shareholders, continue to vote against change. And they do that because they think, so they only cling to fossil fuels because they think that that's what their shareholders want. And your board will only choose a different direction if you vote for change. You can do so by voting for Shareholder Resolution 26, requesting 2030 Scope 3 emission reduction targets in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. Today, when the votes of this AGM are shown, we will show how many shareholders are real stewards of the global economy and how many shareholders enable Shell to continue to cause climate breakdown and jeopardize the long-term future of your company. Because ultimately, it's in the board's and the shareholders' best interest to pursue the opportunities the energy transition presents. This will also preempt risks of losing access to capital markets, job market, policy interventions, litigation, liability for the costs of climate change, disruptive innovation and stranded assets. As long as shareholders enable big oil to cause climate breakdown with their votes against Paris alignment, oil majors will hang on to their fossil fuel business model as long as possible, investing in fossil fuel extraction far outside the boundaries of the Paris Climate Agreement, lobby against climate legislation, refrain from... No, that's not enough. I'm just getting started. Refrain from investing in alternatives at scale and even ignore court rulings. Let's face it, Shell is largely ignoring the court ruling in the Netherlands. The court ruling asked them to reduce all emissions this decade. An important effect of the Follow This climate resolution is to provide clarity. First, clarity that your board does not want to drive down emissions this decade. They want to only make promises for 2050. Second, clarity which investors are determined to drive down emissions this decade by voting in favor, and which investors enable Shell to postpone emission reductions by voting against. So today we thank all investors who voted for change. For example, Dutch investors MN and PGGM, the lead investors in the Climate Action 100 Plus. Almost all large Dutch investors, if they haven't divested. And we thank them for the leadership, and we hope other investors will follow their leadership in the future. The only decision, dear shareholders, you have to make is decouple short-term profits from long-term risk. And for your clarity, I will ask the chairman one question. Mr. Chairman, the question, of course, is, and you are well prepared, can Shell be Paris-aligned without large-scale emission reductions, without, let me rephrase it, can Shell be Paris-aligned without large-scale absolute Scope 3 emissions reductions by 2030?
I'm going to pass over to Wael for a more detailed response to your remarks, but you did ask me a direct question. I think we can be Paris-aligned, and we are. I mean, you glossed over in many ways the tremendous progress we've made with our Scope 1 and 2 absolute emissions. And I would make the same points about the progress that we've made on cutting methane emissions. As you know, that's a very important greenhouse gas as well that often doesn't get mentioned in all of this. But the other part of being Paris-aligned is to enable the whole of society to change. And we enable the whole of society to change towards a lower carbon way of being by owning customers and by working with them in the way I mentioned in my speech, to offer them lower and lower carbon alternatives to the fuel that they require to go about their lives or to do their business, by blending in new materials like biogas, like sustainable aviation fuel, potentially in the future hydrogen, that will allow us to move our customers to a much lower carbon base over time. I think we also enable Paris by our advocacy, not just our marketing with our customers, of course, backed up on the technology and innovation we do, which is also enabling, but also the way in which we talk with governments as to how they can provide a much greater move towards lower carbon alternatives in society at large. Because then there will be the demand, and with that demand, we will find ourselves in the need to meet that demand with a very profitable, and I have to come back to that word, yes, and good return investments in those areas. So I think we are strongly aligned with Paris, and we're also strongly enabling. But there's some other things you said in your speech, and I'm sure that Wael would like to come back to you on.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Van Baal, thank you very much, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the warm introduction. Let me say a few words, and maybe just start with correcting some statements you made, starting with your statement around us not having targets before 2050, which is incorrect. We indeed, as Sir Andrew said, have a very clear Scope 1 and 2 target of a 50% reduction by 2030, of which we are 30% reduced compared to 2016 already, and we have very clear plans to achieve that. From a Scope 3 perspective, which is the emissions from our customers, we have short, medium, and long-term targets. So, for example, last year our target was 3 to 4%. We achieved a 3.8% reduction. Next year it will grow to 4 to 6%, and so on and so forth. So we do have targets. Your other statement around us ignoring the court ruling is also a misleading statement, because as you know well, the court gives Shell and its management broad discretion to be able to achieve the requirements of the court by 2030. Of course, we are appealing that judgment and look forward to engaging in that discussion going forward. But at the heart of it, I think your statement that we are not in line with Paris is flawed, because what we are trying to do is trying to follow the IPCC 1.5 degree scenario that sees us continue to reduce our emissions in line with the targets we have set for ourselves. Once again, what I will say is we do not disagree with you on the destination. We have a different view as to how we get there. The idea that we should sacrifice our customers in the hope of achieving our pathway towards net zero is a flawed concept. We believe that actually spending time understanding our customers, offering them multiple energy options, lower carbon options, such as wind, which we are investing in, solar, which we are investing in, hydrogen, green hydrogen, which we are investing in, biofuels, EV charging, all to the tune of north of $4 billion just last year, I think speaks testament to this board's commitment to the energy transition. And therefore, I continue to be convinced, as I think Sir Andrew said, unanimously, the board is also convinced that this is the wrong resolution for our shareholders. It's not in their best interest, it's not in the interest of our customers, and it's not in the interest of the planet.
Okay, thank you, Will.
So you maintain that you can be Paris-aligned without large-scale emission reductions by 2030. That's a clear answer, so thank you for that. But Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Sawan, you know this is not true. The world must almost halve emissions by 2030. And you maintain that Shell, one of the highest emitters in the world, doesn't have to cut emissions. You are not only misleading your shareholders, you're really insulting their intelligence. And as PGM said, no independent third-party source shows that Shell is Paris-aligned by 2030. Dear shareholders, I hope you take this answer, you remember this answer when you cast your vote next time, because, fellow shareholders, your company will only change if you vote for change. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to open it up to more questions now, so over to you, Tjerk.